Now, a good friend of the show over many, many years is Craig Murray. The Honourable Craig Murray was the British ambassador to Uzbekistan, who was memorably sacked by the Labour government of Tony Blair and Jack Straw. And I quote directly from his dismissal statement: for over-focusing on human rights. Keep those words in your mind. Craig Murray, a Scotsman, a man with whom I have many political disagreements, is a noble, learned, highly principled, determined, and courageous man. It's his birthday today. He would ordinarily be celebrating it with his young family. But in fact, he's celebrating it, if that's the word, like his friend Julian Assange, behind bars in a prison. Yes, that's right. Britain sends journalists to jail, all the while lecturing others about the importance of freedom of expression and freedom of the press. Dr. Deepa Driver is an academic and trade unionist, and herself a good friend of the show, and I'm glad to welcome her now. Dr. Deepa, thanks for joining us. It's a miserable state of affairs where a man of Craig Murray's pedigree and, well, I don't want to insult him, but he's not young, he's no spring chicken. He's got various health ailments, and he's in a Victorian jail. How come?
Well, Craig's case is a case of somebody being stitched up for speaking truth to power. Now, Craig, as you rightly said, is a very honourable man, a man of great integrity, and he's exposed serious criminality at the heart of Scottish government, at the heart of Nicola Sturgeon's government. And so the establishment has come down hard. And, you know, there have been a number of reasons why Alex Salmond himself has been exonerated by a predominantly female jury of the allegations that were laid against him. Unfortunately, the way the mainstream media has worked in the Salmond case is such that none of the defence story, none of Alex's side of the argument was ever really heard, except for what Craig Murray did. Now, Craig Murray did for Alex Salmond something very similar to what he did for Julian Assange, which was to let us know what was really going on in court.
Because the rest of the media was simply not reporting it.
Absolutely. And they were silent, and they were intentionally silent. It was not a case of selective omission of certain things. It was just this unwillingness to challenge anything that the Sturgeon government might find unacceptable. And as you can imagine, Craig, being a deeply honourable man, had made no effort really, or had no intention of revealing the identity of the accusers. And he's been jailed on something called jigsaw identification. Now, this is a very, very poorly tested idea within the law. Jigsaw identification is when potentially you disclose some information which, along with other information that somebody else might know, somebody who works in this person's office or somebody who's a close member of their team might know and might put together with the information you've disclosed to find the identity of the women. Now, Craig knew the identity of the women. He could have disclosed them much earlier had he chosen to do so before the restriction was put on. But
he could have disclosed it before it would have been a crime to do so.
Indeed. I mean, there is a convention in Scotland not to disclose the names of sexual assault accusers. And like in England, there is no law in Scotland that says so. But as a convention, the media doesn't do so, and Craig certainly would not have done so. He could have done it, he didn't do it, and then they used this made-up framework of jigsaw identification to suggest that Craig had identified the accusers. Of course, you will remember that all of these accusers' claims were thrown out of court. But even leaving that aside, what's really interesting is that when this when Craig was accused of jigsaw identification, to this day, he does not know whom he has identified. And that's not specified in the judgment. So nobody knows whom Craig has identified. And in a poll that was conducted, in an opinion poll that was conducted, other mainstream journalists were cited 15 times as much as Craig by those who thought they might have been able to guess who the accusers were. So this is a real nonsense, and it's a shame and a stain on the Scottish judiciary that this case has been allowed to go through, and the sentencing has been extremely harsh. It's the first time in 50 years in the UK that, in the rest of the UK, that such a media contempt of court case has gone through, and the second 70 years in Scotland. And this is just shows you what happens when you stand against the political establishment.
There's a number of deeply disturbing aspects to the Alex Salmond case. I said so from the beginning, and I'm not going to stop saying so now, including this one. And you and I are not going, of course, to break any laws. But if people did know the identity of the accusers, the entire Alex Salmond affair would look very, very different indeed. And so a grave injustice has been done to the falsely accused man, which is my second point. Every day when this is referred to in the media, even now, these accusers are referred to as the victims. But they were not victims. Their stories were disbelieved by the jury, the majority of whom were women. So when does an accuser cease to be described as the victim? And my third point is, for the great majority of people, Alex Salmond might just as well have been convicted. He was acquitted on every single count. But the media hatchet job, including the coverage of the trial, broken only by Craig Murray's small readership of a blog from the upper gallery, the vast majority of coverage has left the vast majority of the public with the false belief that Alex Salmond was guilty when the jury cleared him on every single count.
It is quite interesting how accusation has turned into, the fact that somebody accuses you has turned into a presumption of your guilt rather than a presumption of innocence.
Even after you've been acquitted.
Even after you've been acquitted.
Imagine, let's take it out of this aspect, Doctor.
Sure.
If somebody accused me of punching them in the face, and I was acquitted of having punched them in the face, how could that accuser continue to be described as a victim of my punching them in the face?
I think we all, George, you more than anyone else, I guess, has exposed how the media kind of gang up on people, and especially the mainstream media who engage in client journalism, who are looking to these same people who are in positions of power to give them tidbits of information so that they can hold on to their jobs. Now, Julian Assange changed that with WikiLeaks, where he allowed people to understand unfiltered what the truth really was. And Craig's present situation has to do both with his standing up to Nicola Sturgeon's coterie of people, but also, importantly, standing up in the past in relation to Uzbekistan, as you rightly pointed out, in relation to Sierra Leone, in relation to the Chagos Islands, and more recently, in relation to Julian Assange.
And the Iraq War, of course. He was a prominent opponent of the Iraq War.
Indeed. And in all these situations, he has earned himself both the trust of people who follow him and who understand that what he's doing is really important for them to understand what's going on behind closed doors. But also it's earned him the dislike of people who are in positions of power who do not like their authority challenged.
So what is his current situation, Doctor?
He was sentenced to 8 months in Edinburgh Sorton prison. What's really funny about that, well, it's funny and sad really, is that he was denied the right to do community service on grounds that he was too frail. And then he was then sentenced to 8 months in prison, given that short sentences are no longer liked in Scotland. It's very interesting that a journalist was sentenced to it. So we use the hashtag Scotland jails journalists if you're online. The other thing is that last night, Craig's quite ill, as you rightly pointed out, in various ways. We found out there's been a COVID outbreak in the vicinity of his cell. And the Scottish Justice Minister has been aware since the 1st of September that in Scotland, you can be sent on tagged home release early on if you're a criminal prisoner. That is, if you've undertaken a criminal act. Whereas if you're a civil prisoner, you can't be sent home early because there's an anomaly in the legislation that they put through because they didn't expect somebody like Craig. And I wonder whom it is convenient for that this anomaly is not rectified and Craig continues to stay in prison, where if he had been a criminal, he would have been home weeks ago. So he's going to be in prison until towards the end of November. He'll be home in time for Christmas, hopefully. But until then, he's being denied access to his little baby who's newly born, his 12-year-old son, his older children, his partner, and the decent family life and the medical care he needs. The officers at the prison, obviously, usually I would say, prison staff, etc., etc. But actually, I believe everybody's treating him reasonably well. And he's grateful for that, and he's grateful for the friendships he's made in prison. And like any great person, I think he will come out of that prison with a new and renewed vigor and a new and renewed understanding of the challenges that many working class people who go to prison on the flimsiest of pretenses feel when they have no voice. There is a voice yet still for Craig Murray, even if it's a small voice.
Well, I hope the Prison Diaries is a hot publishing property early next year. There is something of the Oscar Wilde about this, crushing a butterfly on a wheel, isn't there?
I think so. I think it's quite shameful to see that Craig was denied the right to go to Spain to testify in relation to being spied upon within the embassy when he was talking to Julian. And we know Julian was extensively spied upon in the embassy, including privileged conversations with his lawyers. In Craig's case, he's been denied the right to appeal, or rather, they've not taken his appeal further. So he's never had a second hearing. And it's to take a 63-year-old man who's a fantastic person of great integrity in this country, whose voice is very important in the grand scheme of history and in politics, and to make him sit alone 23 hours a day inside a prison cell like his friend Julian Assange. There is a certain poignancy to that, really. It's very sad.
Indeed. Dr. Deepa Driver, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Mother of All Talk Shows.